Everything changed the day I saw Mom's car parked outside that house. She was supposed to be at home, but there she was, betraying us with Edwin Robinson. The discovery tore my world apart. Dad found them half-dressed, and his fury was terrifying. He took her car and left her with nothing. Our family shattered that day. This is my story, a brutal revelation of deceit and revenge, seen through the eyes of a son caught in the middle. Enjoy watching it. I don't really know why my mom and I never got close. Maybe it's because of how I saw her treat my dad. She always criticized him for small things that weren't really his fault. He seemed to live his whole married life being picked on, and I couldn't understand why he married her if she was so unhappy with him. I was born a year after they got married, and I'm their only child. My mom is good-looking. She's now 40 years old, and in old pictures she was very pretty when she was young. Maybe my dad liked how she looked back then. But their marriage has lasted longer than their love. I have a few faint memories of happy times when I was a little kid, but that was a long time ago. Since I was 13, I kept thinking they would get divorced, but they never did. I didn't feel like Mom was mad at me, just mad at everyone. I was too scared to ask my dad about their relationship, so I had to wonder about it myself. My name is Ron Francis. I'm 16 and will be a senior in high school next month. I'll graduate with the class of 58, and I hope I get into state college to start working on my degree. My dad is Sam Francis. I really like him. He's smart and knows a lot about everything and helps me with my homework, especially math. My mom is Helen Francis. I guess you have an idea of what she's like by now. Both my mom and dad are what most people would call good-looking. I'm still growing. I've been gaining some muscle since I joined the swim team, and my girlfriend says it looks good. I believe her. My dad works as a middle manager in an insurance company and earns enough that my mom didn't need to work when I was young. After I turned 15, I wondered why she didn't get a job or do volunteer work just to keep busy. She didn't have any hobbies, nor did she hang out with many neighborhood women. Since I was at school during the week, I wasn't sure what she did all day. On my summer vacations, I had a job at the new supermarket as a box boy. I helped people with their groceries and made deliveries on my bike. When I was old enough to drive, I used the market's van for deliveries, so I was busy most of the time. Because of this, I still didn't know what my mom did during the summer either. I found out what my mom was doing by chance. That's often how these things happen, right? One afternoon, I was delivering groceries to an old lady, and as I drove up to her house, I noticed a familiar car parked next door. It was my mom's old '49 Pontiac. I recognized the scratched fender before I checked the license plate. I didn't know who lived in that house, and after I delivered the groceries, I sat in the van, wondering. I took out my notepad and wrote down the address with a big question mark. Then I put the notepad back and went on with my deliveries. I didn't think about it again until that evening during dinner when my parents were talking. "How was your day, dear?" my dad asked, like he always does. "The usual," my mom said tiredly. "I was home all day with not much to do. I just sat on the back porch in the shade and read for a while." I looked at her but couldn't see any sign that she was lying, but I knew she was. I felt a strange sensation in my stomach, and it didn't go away. After dinner, I went up to my room and sat at my desk, thinking about what my mom said. I pulled out the notebook and wrote the address in my school binder, wondering how I could find out who she was visiting. I remembered the library had a reverse directory where I could look up the address and find out who lived there. I made a note to check it out as soon as possible. The next day during lunch, I made a quick trip to the library. I looked up the address and found a phone number and a name, Edwin S. Robinson. I didn't know if he was the only one living there, but at least I had a name. I didn't know what to do next. It was Wednesday. I delivered groceries to the house next door at 2:30 on Tuesday. Maybe with some planning I could drive by again at the same time and see if my mom's car was there. By changing my route a bit, I managed to drive past the Robinson house at around 2:45 the next day. My mom's car wasn't there. I wondered if seeing her car on Tuesday was just a one-time thing. But on Thursday, when I was driving through our neighborhood around 2 o'clock, I saw that her car wasn't in our driveway. I looked at my delivery schedule and made a quick change, heading back toward the Robinson house. To my surprise, her car was parked there again. I now had a mystery. but I still didn't know what to do. Everyone needs someone to confide in. For me, that person was my girlfriend, Penny Lane. She was the one person I could talk to about the strange things I'd seen in the past 2 days without the whole town finding out. I should mention, I live in a small town. People say everyone knows everyone, but that's not really true. Either our town isn't that small, or we don't socialize like small-town people used to. I can't honestly say I know half of the people in this town, either by name or by neighborhood. Sure, here's the simplified and neutral version of the story. True, there is only one high school, 2 supermarkets, and 1 drive-in movie theater in my town. Still, there's a lot I don't know about it. Penny, her real name is Peony, and I were both born and raised here. We'll both be starting our senior year in high school soon. We've been friends forever, and lately, we've started seeing each other in a more mature way. She's pretty, and I'm lucky to call her my steady girlfriend. She's also really smart, so when I need advice, she's the person I ask. I don't have any adults I can talk to about this, especially not my parents. Penny and I see each other almost every day, so I didn't have to wait long to share my problem with her. I wanted to see if she had any ideas about what we should do next. She didn't let me down. "Well, there are a couple of things we could try," she said. "Really? Like what?" I was surprised she thought of something so quickly. I could pretend to be doing a survey and ask them some questions. I can say I'm with the newspaper and want to know what people think of it. Then I can ask about how many people read the paper in their house and if they are men or women, adults or kids. Basic stuff. But there was one problem. My mom just slams the door on people like that. I said seriously. "It's always a risk they won't answer, but if they do, we get important information," she said, smiling. "Why are you doing the survey and not me? This is my problem." "They might know something about you or your family. Maybe someone even has a picture of you. It's better this way," she said. "Why don't we start by figuring out what questions to ask?" So we did. Penny said she had learned how surveys can get a lot of information without people realizing it. We spent about an hour coming up with a few questions that would give us the most information. In the end, we had 7 questions that she was sure would tell us a lot about the Robinson household. Penny planned to go to the Robinsons' house at around 10 the next morning. She thought that would be a good time to catch Mrs. Robinson. If no one was home, she would try at 7 that evening. But then she told me my part in the plan. "Pete, I want you to be at their house by 7 in the morning. I want to see who comes out and when. If they have kids, they won't be off to school but may have a babysitter. I'm guessing the man will leave for work between 7 and 8. If the wife works, she'll probably leave after the kids or drive them somewhere. If she does, wait and see if she comes back. Got it?" she asked cheerfully. "Yeah, I think so. I just had to think of a reason to be out so early. I decided to say I had to do inventory at the store before it opened." Penny approved. We were all set for the next morning, and I was actually excited. It felt like being a detective, with Penny as the brains and me as the assistant. We agreed that if the mom didn't return, I would call Penny at 9 to save her the trip. She thinks of everything. I was set up by 6:50 a.m. the next morning, well hidden behind a large hedge across the street. A man, who I guessed was Mr. Robinson, walked out with a newspaper under one arm and a small briefcase in the other. He went to the car, put his things in the back seat, and got in. He let the car idle for a couple of minutes before a woman came out and locked the door. She got into the car, and they drove off toward town. That answered some questions. No kids, and they both left together. We still had some mysteries to solve. I rode my bike to a nearby phone booth, put in a nickel, and called Penny. She answered quickly like she had been waiting by the phone. "What happened?" she asked excitedly. "Not much. He left just before 7, and I think his wife left a couple of minutes later. They drove to town. I didn't see any kids. She locked the door, so I don't think anyone's home," I explained. "Good work, Ron. What were they wearing?" she asked, almost as an afterthought. "He wore a suit and tie and a hat. She had a plain dress on, gray and blue, I think," I said, trying to remember. "Okay, sounds like they both work. Next, we need to follow them. Can you do that tomorrow?" she asked, almost out of breath. "I can try, but I might not keep up on my bike," I explained. "Yeah, that could be a problem." Penny started thinking deeply, and I knew to wait quietly. She was really good at coming up with plans. Ron, I think we should visit the library and check the voter registration list. It shows jobs. It should tell us what they do. I never thought of that. Okay, can you do that for me? I have to work and might not have time today. Sure, leave it to me. Remember to check the house around 2 this afternoon, she reminded me. I'll meet you at my house after dinner. Don't be late. I want to try that survey on them, she warned. Got it. See you then. Good luck and... Thanks, Penny. You're a good friend, I said sincerely. Be careful, Ron. Don't do anything silly. We don't know what's happening, she cautioned. Yeah, I'll be okay. See you later. I finished and hung up the phone. I rode my bike to the store and pushed it into the loading shed as usual. I grabbed the van keys from the shipping counter and started my first deliveries. I usually did the restaurant run first, and today was no different. I have to say my mind wasn't completely on my job that day. I was worried about what might be going on between my mom and Mr. Edwin S. Robinson. It was one thing for her to be mean, but another for her to cheat on Dad. I looked up the word adulteress in the dictionary, and it didn't sound nice. It means a woman who cheats on her husband. It was hard to believe, but I started to think it was possible. I was busy most of the day, so I didn't think much about Mom's strange visits. As I rode home after work, I thought about what I would do if she was cheating on Dad. Would I tell him? I didn't know if I could. I didn't want to hurt him, but I couldn't let her just get away with it. Gosh, I had already decided she was guilty without any proof. I didn't like her much, so I guess I just assumed she was guilty. It didn't feel good. Maybe there was an innocent reason for her to be there those 2 days. After all, she wasn't there today. But then, today was Friday, and she seemed to go there on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I rushed through dinner and excused myself to go to Penny's. Mom reminded me about the dishes, so I waited for them to finish eating. I quickly did the dishes and cleaned up the kitchen. Dad said I could use the car as long as I was home by 9. I wouldn't disappoint him. I got to Penny's about 6:30. She was obviously waiting for me. You all set? I asked. I completely forgot to ask her about the voters list information. Sometimes I'm a bit absent-minded. Yes. I have the questionnaire here. I typed it on my dad's stationery. It looks more official that way, she said. The voters list shows his job is a salesman and his wife is a secretary. Both are on the list, she concluded. She got in the car and we drove to the Robinson house. It was still light but would be sunset in an hour. Penny was wearing a simple navy blue skirt, white blouse, and plain black shoes. She wanted to look professional. She needed these people to cooperate. I stopped the car almost a block from the Robinson house and Penny got out. Wish me luck, she said with a nervous smile. You'll be okay. I just know it, I said confidently. If anyone could do this, Penny could. She was back 10 minutes later, flushed with excitement. Ron, you'll never guess, she gasped. They both came to the door and answered the questions, then argued about which answer was right. Her eyes were bright with excitement. I was really proud of her. Nice job. Let's go somewhere and figure out what we learned, I suggested. She nodded, and we drove to one of our favorite spots by the river. Penny was reading her notes with deep concentration, and I reminded myself not to disturb her. Well, here's what we learned, she began. They both work and have no children. He is a route salesman for a paper box company, and she's a secretary at the Columbia State Bank. He goes out of town on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. She takes the bus home on those days. Ron, it was amazing. Once I got them started, they wouldn't stop talking. They would tell me anything. I even made up a couple of questions on the spot, she confessed. Wow. What else did you learn? I asked eagerly. Well, he's from here. A local guy. She's from Bend River. They met when he came back from Europe after the war. I gather she can't have children. He's not bad-looking. Maybe Mom sees that too, she suggested. Anyway, they seem to be doing okay. They have been buying new furniture and just got a new hi-fi and a new 21 inches TV. He said he'd be putting up the antenna this weekend. Okay. So now we know about them. But it doesn't tell us what's going on, does it? I asked. Maybe not. But remember, he's in town all day on Tuesday and Thursday. He can go home in the afternoon and still have time to pick his wife up from work, Penny said with a wrinkled brow. I think the cops call that opportunity when they arrest someone. Oh, one more thing. What school did your mom go to? She asked excitedly. "Jefferson, it's gone now," I answered. "That's the same school he went to," she said triumphantly. "That was one of my made-up questions." She grinned with satisfaction. "You are amazing, Penny," I said with pride. I was lucky to have Penny as my girlfriend, and I wanted to be with her even more as I got older. Penny was really good at finding out information. She learned that Mom and Mr. Robinson were about the same age and went to the same high school, so they must have known each other. But what was going on between them? I sat in the car quietly for a while as Penny watched me. "This isn't good, is it?" Penny finally said. "No, it isn't. But we don't have any proof. I don't know what to do next. I just can't think of anything else," I said sadly. Penny was quiet for a long time. Then she spoke again. "What if we scare your mom?" she asked. "Why?" "I saw a movie the other night on TV. It was about a guy who got an anonymous letter saying he was in danger. He didn't know who sent it. It made him go crazy. Later, he got another letter telling him his days were numbered. It was a really spooky movie, and he finally hurt himself because he didn't know what was going to happen," Penny said, sounding distant. "What are you suggesting, Penny? That we drive my mom crazy?" I asked, shocked. "No, but we can scare her. Maybe it'll make her stop what she's doing," she suggested. "What would the letter say?" I asked, now curious. "How about, 'Who is Edwin S. Robinson?' We can type it on plain paper and put it in a plain envelope with no return address," she suggested. "Okay. That would surprise her, I bet," I said. It didn't sound too harmful, but it might upset her. Then I had another thought. "What if it doesn't work?" I asked. Penny thought for a moment, then answered. "We send another letter with something like, 'Does your husband know about Mr. Robinson?'" She smiled. "Yeah, I like that." "Then what?" I asked, getting interested in the plan. "I don't know. Let's wait and see how your mom reacts to the first letter or even the second before we decide," she said firmly. "Okay. Wow, Penny. You are really good at this. Mystery solving, I mean." My compliment was sincere. "We haven't solved anything yet, Ron. We need to figure this out, and I'm really eager to get to the bottom of this," Penny said. I drove Penny home, gave her a kiss on the cheek, and then headed home with a lot of questions in my head. What was my mom up to? Was she really cheating? One part of me hoped it wasn't true, but another part thought it might explain why my dad was so sad. If she was cheating, my dad could get a divorce and she would get almost nothing. In the old days, there would have been a mark of shame on her. We're more civilized now, but I wondered if Dad would still send her away. I got home a little before 9, so I knew I wouldn't get a lecture from Mom. I headed to my room to think about what I'd learned and what to do next. As I lay on my bed, I wondered if my dad knew anything about this. Did he have any idea she might be seeing someone else? He was smart. It was hard to believe my mom could fool him for a long time. Penny and I were going to the movies on Saturday night. When I picked her up in my dad's shiny new white and gold Dodge, I felt great. She wore her best pink and charcoal poodle skirt, saddle shoes, white socks, and a pink blouse. She looked amazing. I held the door for her, and she slid onto the passenger seat. When I got in, she handed me an unsealed plain envelope with my mom's name and address on it. Private was typed on it in capital letters. There was no return address, just a 4-cent stamp. I opened it and unfolded the single page. The single line of type simply asked, "Who is Mr. Edwin Robinson?" I stared at the letter for a moment while my thoughts raced. What would she think when she got this? How would she react? My mom always got the mail first since it was delivered just before noon. I wished I could see her face when she opened this letter. But I knew I would be at work when the mailman came. I looked at Penny and handed the letter back to her. I pushed the drive button on the dashboard, and we headed toward the theater. I can't remember much about the movie that night. I wasn't paying attention because my mind was busy with thoughts about what might happen in the next few days. We had started something, and once that letter went into the mailbox, there was no turning back. I figured the letter wouldn't arrive until Tuesday. But just to be sure, I watched how my mom acted on Monday evening when I got home from work. I didn't notice anything different, and when Dad came home, she didn't act any differently than usual. I figured the letter hadn't arrived yet. The next day was when she usually went to Mr. Robinson's house. In the afternoon, I drove by and was surprised. Her car wasn't there. I worried she might have wanted to warn him. I then went to the factory where he worked to look for his car, a turquoise and white '55 Chevy sedan, but I couldn't find it, or my mom's car in the parking lot. I got home as soon as I could and tried to talk to her, hoping to notice anything unusual. I picked a topic: my plan to go to junior college nearby instead of state for the first 2 years. This would mean staying at home, and I wanted to see how she'd react. "Hey, Mom, there's something I need to talk to you and Dad about," I started. She glanced at me, puzzled. "Why don't you wait until your dad's home?" she asked. "I just wanted to let you know I've decided on college," I explained. "I'm going to go to junior college here instead of state for the first 2 years. I'll save money and still live at home, and then save up for the last 2 years at state." Her shoulders dropped and she didn't answer right away. She turned back to the kitchen. "We'll talk about this when your dad gets home," she said. I couldn't tell anything from her reaction. I went up to my room and sat at my desk for a bit. I heard Mom come upstairs, go to her bedroom, and close the door. That was odd. I remembered where she usually put the mail and quietly went downstairs to the laundry room to check the trash. There it was, the envelope I had mailed on Saturday night. The inner page was gone. She had seen the question. When Dad came home, I could tell Mom wasn't herself. She wasn't ignoring him, but she kept her distance. During dinner, I brought up the junior college idea. Dad didn't seem thrilled. He said I could learn independence at state, not at home. I was surprised, but had to respect his logic. I dropped the subject. I still had my senior year and time to decide. Mom remained silent throughout. After dinner, I rode my bike to my friend Penny's to tell her what had happened. She was as surprised as I was that Mom hadn't reacted strongly to the letter. We talked more and decided to see if Mom went to Robinson's on Thursday. I told Penny I had a bad feeling about all this and thought nothing good would come from it. Penny comforted me. We sat and talked, and it felt good to share. I felt like I was carrying a heavy load and wanted to unload it soon. I suggested forgetting everything, but Penny reminded me of how unhappy I was before and asked if I didn't want to know what was really happening. She was right. Thursday, I drove by Robinson's and didn't see Mom's car out front. I thought our letter had scared her off, which made me happy. But on slowing to let a car pass, I noticed a familiar car up the lane. I looped around to check from the other end. There was Mom's car, hidden near Robinson's garage. I was upset and could hardly be nice to her at dinner. I quickly went over to Penny's. "Ron, I guess we need to go to the next step," Penny said. "What's the next step?" "I've been thinking. I don't want this to drag out. We should send the next letter to Dad. It's up to him then," I sighed. "Are you sure?" Penny asked. "No, but if we send another warning, who knows what might happen. Let's send a short note to Dad asking why Mom's car is at Robinson's on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Then it's his problem, not ours." Penny agreed and said she would prepare the letter that night, addressing it to his work and marking it private so Mom wouldn't see it. Again, I felt empty. I left Penny's, promised to call her tomorrow, and headed home slowly on my bike, not eager to get back. I wondered if I'd gone too far and felt deep in trouble. I guessed I'd know soon. When Dad came home Monday night, something was off. He looked unhappy, spoke little, and barely talked at dinner. Mom seemed normal, so I figured she didn't know what was going on. I was pretty sure Dad had gotten the letter and was upset. I thought he might wait until I left to talk to Mom, but later that night, everything seemed normal. Mom was listening to the radio and Dad was working in the basement. No problems seemed to be brewing. It took me some time to piece together what happened that Tuesday afternoon. From what I gather, Dad got off work early and drove to the Robinsons' neighborhood. He parked and walked to their house looking around. He didn't see Mom's car out front, so he went around back and saw it parked there. That's when he decided to confront the situation head-on. He walked up to the back door and knocked. When no one answered, he tried the door, found it unlocked, and went inside. He must have heard voices because he went to the front bedroom and found Mom and Mr. Robinson in their underwear, lying on the bed. Mr. Robinson must have been scared out of his wits because I heard he tried to hide in the closet while Dad yelled at Mom. It was a really bad scene. Dad took Mom's car keys from her purse, stormed out, and drove her car home, putting it in the garage, which never happened since the garage was reserved for the Dodge. I'm not sure how he got his car back. Maybe he took a taxi. By the time I got home, the Dodge was in the driveway, and Dad was at the kitchen table with a strong drink in front of him. There was no sign of Mom. I had to play dumb or I'd be in trouble too, so I asked Dad where Mom was. "She's not here," he said angrily, "and she isn't coming back." He almost spat the words out. "What do you mean?" I asked, acting innocent. "I caught her in bed with another man, Son. She cheated on me. On us. She's been unfaithful and I'm going to divorce her," he said with clear and firm words. "Holy cow, Dad, are you sure?" I asked, genuinely shocked. I thought he'd be sad or confused, but he was acting fast. He seemed angry, but also out for revenge. This was a side of Dad I hadn't seen before. It's hard not to be sure when they're nearly naked on a bed together. Your mother didn't even try to deny it. He wasn't looking at me while he spoke. He took another drink and just stared at the glass. "She's going to pay for this. She won't have anything when this is over. She'll be lucky to have the clothes on her back." His anger was clear. I hoped my mother wouldn't come home that night. I feared what might happen. But then I wondered, where was she? Where could she go? I needed to talk to Penny, so I told Dad I was going over there and didn't want any dinner. He just nodded, and I left on my bike, riding slowly to my girlfriend's house. When I reached Penny's house, I was a mess. It took all my strength to tell her what Dad had said. It was the worst news I could imagine. I just sat there with my head in my hands, feeling miserable. I wasn't good company that night or for many nights after. My mother had disappeared, and it would be a long time before I would hear from her again. I was surprised that Dad and I managed well on our own. We did our laundry except for his shirts, and even tried ironing, though not very well. We shared vacuuming duties and figured out how to make simple meals, so we ate properly and stayed healthy. Dad surprised me by giving me the keys to Mom's car, which was actually his car that he let Mom drive. I promised to keep it in good shape and wash it every week, which I was doing for Mom anyway, so it wasn't a big deal. Not many seniors at my school had their own car, so I felt pretty lucky. Dad told me it was hard to find Mom to give her the divorce papers, but they eventually did at her aunt's house in Salem. The legal process started. Dad said the court would be hard on her since the reason was adultery, and that was serious. He didn't know what would happen to Mr. Robinson, but he was listed as something called the correspondent. It took almost a year for the divorce to go through, and Mom ended up with almost nothing. Dad said he gave her $500 and her clothes and jewelry, and that was all. She would have to start fresh somewhere else. Too many people in our town knew what she did and would never let her forget it. Dad found a new lady, someone from his office he had known for a few years. Her husband had been killed in Korea, and she needed a job, so she was working in Dad's office. They started dating about 3 months after Mom left. Her name was Janine Carter, and Dad really liked her. He said I'd meet her soon. Dad spent most evenings with Janine. I was glad to see him happy again. He had quickly moved on from the anger and desire for revenge I saw that afternoon, and was back to his old self. We talked a lot about college and agreed it was my decision whether to go to state right away or stay local for 2 years. I thought it would depend on whether I could get a swimming scholarship at state, which would help with money. Dad didn't seem too worried about money and told me to do what I wanted without worrying about the cost. That took a lot of stress off. Penny and I are still very close. She was also upset about my parents' divorce and felt guilty, thinking none of this would have happened if she hadn't suggested sending those letters. I reminded her that they were unhappy even before everything started, and she agreed that maybe it was for the best. I had lost touch with my mom and didn't make much effort to find her. I got a Christmas card from her that had an address in Salem where her aunt lived. I guessed she was staying there. I didn't send her a card and didn't feel bad about it. A few months later, a lawyer notified us that her aunt had died and left some money for me in her will. It was a $100 bond for my education. I didn't remember her aunt, so I was surprised she left me anything. That money covered almost a third of my first-year tuition at state, so I was very grateful. Dad introduced me to Janine at Thanksgiving. I saw her several times as she came over for dinner. She had blonde hair, a big smile, and seemed very cheerful. She was about 35, not much younger than Dad. I could see why he liked her. She was fun and always happy, quite the opposite of how my mom had been recently. So I wasn't shocked when Dad told me he planned to propose to Janine as soon as the divorce was finalized. If she said yes, Dad wanted her to move in with us. They would be engaged, and she could stay in the spare room, saving money and avoiding trouble. I had to laugh. Can you imagine people worrying about such things in 1958? Times were changing. Dad had some catching up to do, but I was happy to see him happy, and I got along fine with Jeanine. School was going well thanks to Penny's help. We studied together, and she taught me how to study better. With her help, my grades improved a lot. I was also doing well on the swim team, and we were heading to the state high school championships. I hoped it would lead to an athletic scholarship, but I wasn't counting on it. Penny hadn't decided what to do next. She was too smart not to go to college, but money was tight. I suggested she apply for scholarships or bursaries. She might go to the local junior college to save money. In early May, I got a letter and recognized the handwriting right away. It was from my mother. I put it on my desk and took a deep breath before reading it. I never thought I'd hear from her again. I had imagined her missing out on my future, never seeing me get married or meeting her grandkids. I opened the letter with shaking hands. "My dearest Ronald," it began. She wrote that she had been trying to write to me for a long time and finally found the courage. She wanted to apologize for many things. She said both Dad and she had been very unhappy for years. Dad became distant 5 years ago, and she suspected he had found someone else, though he denied it. She thought about leaving him once I was in college, but felt she had to keep the family together until then. Eventually, she fell into a relationship with Mr. Robinson. She said it was a mistake she would never forgive herself for. She thought she might have wanted to get caught to end the misery. She expressed her love for me and hoped for my forgiveness, but she also made it clear she would never interfere in my life again. Reading the letter, tears ran down my face. I hadn't realized how much I missed her despite everything. She was still my mother, and I still loved her in my way. I tried to understand her reasons, but felt she was blaming Dad for her own problems. The envelope had a return address from another state. I put the letter in my shoebox of keepsakes. "Maybe someday," I'd reply. I didn't show the letter to anyone, not even Penny, and I'm pretty sure Dad didn't know about it. I still have it and probably always will. Jeanine moved in with us in late May, and almost immediately things changed. If they thought they could fool me with their late-night activities, they were wrong. Jeanine was quite loud in bed. She liked to tell Dad how he was doing and what she wanted. For me, it was like advanced lessons on adult relationships. She enjoyed being with Dad and didn't care who knew it. I think Dad felt a bit awkward, but I found it interesting and even funny. Besides, he deserved some joy in his life, and he was certainly getting plenty of it. Jeanine wasn't great at cooking. Dad and I made more meals than she did, and honestly, that was for the best. She wasn't keen on housework either. She and Dad would get home in the late afternoon, and she'd be too tired to do much. It felt like it was just Dad and me again. Oh, and she didn't iron, so we still sent Dad's shirts to the cleaners. But overall, we were happy. It was a big change from the tension during Mom and Dad's time and the lonely days when it was just Dad and me. One thing Jeanine did like was watching TV. She knew all her favorite shows by heart, including the channels, days, and times. So she had that skill at least. It was late June on a Saturday afternoon. I was at the kitchen table with Jeanine, talking about my plans for college and my relationship with Penny. She found it very interesting. She thought it was sweet that Penny and I had known each other since we were kids and still wanted to be together. She bluntly asked if Penny and I had been intimate, and I blushed, saying we hadn't. She seemed to think we were missing out and said she had her first serious relationship at 15. I was surprised by her casual tone about it. Somehow we got talking about love. She mentioned her first husband, who she thought she loved, but it turned out differently. She didn't seem too upset about his passing in Korea, which I mentioned. "Who said he died in Korea?" she asked, looking puzzled. "That's what Dad told me," I replied. "No way. I left him and got a quick divorce in Reno. He's probably still in some trailer park in Idaho," she said casually. Well, that was a shock. I guess Dad didn't want me to think less of her for being divorced. I could understand that. "So, how did you and Dad meet?" I asked curiously. I noticed him as soon as I started working at his office. He was the cutest and smartest guy there, and I set my sights on him, she said proudly. I began to feel uneasy. It was a feeling I hadn't had for a while, but it was returning. "So, how long have you worked at the agency?" I asked carefully. "Over 5 years, almost 6, she answered, smiling. "So how long have you and Dad been together?" I asked, just as carefully. "About a month after I started. When I want something, I go for it." "Your dad didn't stand a chance," she laughed. I realized she had just told me everything. I felt faint and it must have shown. "Are you okay, Ron?" she asked, looking worried. "Yeah, I'll be fine. Maybe just something I ate," I stammered. "Excuse me, I need to go to Penny's." "I'll be back in a while," I said. I drove to Penny's with my mind racing. I couldn't believe what I'd just heard. How could he? When I got there, I was glad to find Penny in the backyard reading a book. She looked lovely, and I told her so. She gave me a strange look and could see I was upset. "What's wrong, Ron?" she asked, concerned. "Penny, we have another task. We have to find my mother." Chapter 1. I turned and watched the beautiful woman walking slowly toward me, her father by her side. She looked stunning in her white wedding dress, and her father looked handsome in his tuxedo. The organ played the traditional wedding music as everyone in the church waited with excitement. I glanced quickly at Frank and Mom in the front row, both of them smiling at me. Mom had tears on her cheeks, but I knew they were tears of joy. Today, my dream was coming true. I felt like I'd been waiting for this moment since I met my future bride. Penny Lane was just a few steps away now, and soon we would be husband and wife. I was filled with excitement and nervousness. I had been through tough situations as a pilot without feeling as anxious as I did now. I knew it showed how important this moment was to me. I glanced down to make sure my dress uniform was perfect, and then looked up to see her right in front of me, smiling through her tears. I was about to start a new chapter in my life. I held her hands as the minister began the ceremony. I didn't take my eyes off her the entire time, listening as he spoke the words that would bind us together. After we had repeated our vows, answered the questions, and said, "I do," I gently pulled her closer, wrapped my arms around her, and gave her a kiss full of love. A dream I had cherished for years had finally come true, and I felt like the happiest man alive. But it hadn't been an easy journey. Chapter 2. My third year at Oregon State University ended with mixed emotions. First, my girlfriend Liz left to return to Canada to finish her schooling. She had made it to her national swim team, and they wanted her close by. It hurt a lot. We had just gotten serious a few months earlier, and I was thinking about asking her to marry me. But all those plans fell apart. Losing Liz would have left me feeling really down, but something amazing happened just after she left. I found my mother. She was living in Bellingham, Washington, and had remarried. She looked great and was genuinely happy with her new husband, Frank Trimble. He was a pilot and a really nice guy. Seeing Mom so happy made me feel a lot better, especially since she wasn't mad at me for telling Dad about her affair. I promised myself I would stay close to her and make up for the pain I had caused. But then again, if Dad hadn't divorced her, she would never have met Frank. Life is strange that way. Frank took me up in one of his planes, and I was thrilled to be sitting in the cockpit with him. He even let me fly it for a bit. I was so excited that I knew I wanted to learn to fly. I still had to serve in the military after I graduated, so I needed to choose a branch that would give me the best chance to become a pilot. Frank had been in the Air Force, so he naturally thought that would be the best choice. When I got back to Corvallis to start my summer job, I got another big surprise. Penny had tried to call me while I was up north. She left a number, but it was for a motel in Eugene, and she'd checked out a few days before I got back. That really got me thinking. With Liz gone, there wasn't anyone I was excited to see except Mom and Frank. Penny and I had been really close, and even though we were young, we had thought about marriage too. We were only 18 then, but very much in love. We had known each other since grade school. When I moved to Oregon, we wrote to each other for a while, but soon it was clear it was hard to keep things going from far away. I told her to find someone else because I wasn't going to be back for a long time. She knew I wasn't going to visit my dad after what he did to Mom. Anyway, she wrote that she found a new guy, said he was nice, and they had a lot in common. I think my letter hurt her feelings. I had mixed feelings about her seeing another guy too. At the time, I thought I was in love with Liz, but it felt strange when Penny said she was with someone else. It wasn't until I got that phone message that I realized I still had strong feelings for her. We were both 21 now, starting our last year of college, and needed to plan our futures. The more I thought about mine, two things kept coming back. Penny and flying. Now I had something to look forward to and someone I wanted to talk to. I decided to call Penny at her home and see what was happening in her life. I needed a private place to make the call, so I thought of my Aunt Hilda first. I called her from the dorm and told her what I wanted to do. She was happy about it and said I could repay her for the call. Aunt Hilda reminded me that we were 2 hours behind Aberdeen, so the best time to call might be after my work in the evening. After 6, the rates were cheaper, and it would still only be just after 8 in Aberdeen. That sounded perfect, and Aunt Hilda invited me for supper too. I couldn't say no to one of her home-cooked meals. Since she wanted to hear all about Mom and her new husband, it was a perfect plan. My new summer job was in Salem, so I had to plan how to get there and back without too much trouble. The alumni had arranged a better job for me since I was now a co-captain. I was grateful that I would have more money by September. But there was another benefit I didn't realize. When I showed up at Capital Motors on Monday morning, I checked in at the office and learned that the boss wasn't in yet and wouldn't be for another hour. I wandered through the empty showroom looking at the new Fords and Mercurys, wishing I could afford one. After a while, I went outside and walked over to the used car lot and looked over the cars. It was clear there were 2 types of cars, shiny newer models at the front and older ones at the back. I promised myself that when I bought my first car, it would be from the front row. Mr. Randolph, the owner and an OSU alumnus, showed up just after 9. I waited until he went to his office before knocking on his door frame. He looked up with a questioning face. "Yeah, what can I do for you?" he said gruffly. "I'm Ron Francis from OSU. I was told to report to you for a summer job." "Oh yeah, see Marty Coulson and he'll tell you what to do. Do you have a car?" "No, I've been using the bus." "Okay, you can use any car from the back row as long as you don't take the same one 2 days in a row." His head dropped back down to his work. "Huh?" I replied intelligently. He looked at me with a puzzled expression and then smiled. "I guess you didn't know that I'll let you borrow a car to get here. Just don't take the same car 2 days in a row and don't damage it." No. I didn't know," I said, stumbling over my words. "But thanks. That's great. Thanks." "All right, kid, but don't even think about taking one of the cars in the front row. Got it?" Yes, of course, thank you. That's really great." I was surprised and happy about this news. I was about to go find my contact when I realized I didn't remember his name. What was the name of the guy I was supposed to see again? Marty Coulson. He's in the shop. Now get to work, okay? "Yes, sir, and thanks again," I said more confidently as I headed to the shop. I introduced myself to Marty. I could tell he was a mechanic because of his greasy clothes and the unlit cigar in his mouth. He told me my job was to wash the cars on the lot and run errands for parts to automotive suppliers and other car dealers. I would use the company truck for those trips. Marty said if I was smart, I would wash the cars first thing since they had to be cleaned every day. If I had long trips, I might not have time to wash all the cars before the shop closed. Marty also kept the keys for the used cars and would give me one to take back to OSU each night. I asked Marty about weekends, and he said it was okay to take a car on Saturdays since I worked that day. Sundays, they were closed. No one told me this was a 6-day-a-week job, but I didn't have much else to do anyway. The job wasn't very hard, so I could still take extra courses in my final year. The pay was good, and working an extra day meant I made more money than I ever had. It was also more than I expected. On Wednesday of that first week, I went to Aunt Hilda's to call Penny's home. I was very nervous. I didn't know what to expect, but she had called me, so she was clearly still thinking about me and wasn't angry. After dinner, I went to the living room to make the call. I dialed the operator, gave her the town and Penny's number. I heard a series of clicks. The operator spoke to another operator, and then I heard ringing. "Hello?" a man answered. It didn't sound like Penny's dad. "Mr. Lane?" I asked carefully. "Nope. Sorry. You have the wrong number." "Is this Walnut 29195 in Aberdeen?" "That's right, but no one named Lane lives here." "Oh, I see. I'm sorry to bother you." I hung up slowly. I was confused. I was sure I had the right number. I had dialed it so many times I could do it in my sleep. Maybe they'd moved. One way to find out was to write a letter to the old address and see what happened. If I got an answer, I'd know where her family was, and they would know where Penny was. If they'd moved, maybe it would get forwarded. The worst thing that could happen is I'd get it back unopened. Not much to lose for a 5-cent stamp. I wrote her a short letter saying I got her message but missed her call. I told her I would have loved to talk to her and hear what was going on in her life. I hoped I'd hear from her, and we could start writing to each other again. I crossed my fingers and mailed the letter. Mom and Frank called twice a month, and it was great to talk to them, even if I wasn't in a private place. The dorm hall was pretty quiet in the summer, but I thought it would be harder to have a private conversation when classes started again. I had visited the Air Force recruiting office in Salem and talked with an officer. With my university degree, I was good for officer candidate school, but there was no guarantee I could be a pilot. They couldn't promise anything. I spent the summer working at the car lot. The job wasn't bad. I got to take a car back to the dorm every day, making it easier to go back and forth to Salem. They even provided almost half a tank of gas. I learned which of the back row cars were good and which were not. I narrowed my choices to about 5 or 6 cars, hoping they wouldn't all sell over the summer. Marty figured out what I was doing and said I was smart for a college boy. We got along great. He taught me how to spot bad used cars, which I knew would be helpful in the future. My senior year began just after Labor Day. I quickly got back into my routine, but I missed Liz. We had been together for 2 years. It took me time to adjust to being alone. Funny enough, I didn't want to find a new girlfriend. Not even when my letter to Penny came back marked "Return to Sender." The lanes had moved, and I had no way to find them. Aunt Hilda wondered if Penny was at the University of Oregon in Eugene, and that's why she had called from there. A quick call confirmed no Peony Lane or Penny Lane was registered at U of O. Another dead end. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a 21-year-old guy who needed to shave every day and looked pretty plain compared to some other guys on campus. I wasn't new to relationships anymore, and I was bigger and more muscular than when I first came to Corvallis. I had experienced a lot in the last 3 years and had to smile at most of it. I was a good swimmer and co-captain of the swim team. I also did well in my classes and was set to graduate next spring, but I was worried about my future. I didn't know what path to take. I was sure I wanted to learn to fly, but it wasn't easy to make that happen. The Air Force Academy had many more applicants than spots, so my chances of becoming a pilot were slim. I thought about the Navy, but getting into the Naval Academy was just as tough as the Air Force. Starting school all over again didn't seem right. Our swim team had a meet at Eureka College in California early in the fall. That's when I got interested in the Coast Guard. I still wasn't sure which service I wanted to join and doubted if I would get the chance to fly. Was it just a hope that would never come true? I had some free time before the event started in the afternoon, so I wandered near the Coast Guard base. I hadn't realized they had aircraft, but I saw a transport plane and some seaplanes taking off. Suddenly, the Coast Guard seemed cool. It might be my best chance to fly. I knew I had to serve my country. I didn't want to end up in places like Vietnam, and I was unsure what to do if I couldn't become a pilot. I didn't know how I would make a living and worried I might end up selling vacuum cleaners. The whole idea was depressing, and without Liz to cheer me up, I wasn't very happy. I had a job at Capital Motors and a car to use, so I couldn't really complain. I had money and could have gone on dates, but I wasn't interested in girls. I hung out with my friends or went to sports events on weekends. I had a few beers, played pickup basketball sometimes, but nothing serious. I was lucky to have swimming to fill my free time. I didn't enjoy my success on the swim team as much as before. It was probably because Liz wasn't there to push me to do better. It wasn't that I didn't care, but I wasn't as motivated as I should have been for a team co-captain. No one said anything, but I could sense the disappointment. Frank and Mom came to my graduation, bringing Aunt Hilda. I enjoyed the day with them. I was happy that I had graduated with good grades and could add BA to my resume. We had a nice dinner at Aunt Hilda's, better than any restaurant. Mom and Frank gave me a nice blazer and slacks, and Aunt Hilda gave me a cool dress shirt and tie. All I needed was a new pair of dress shoes, and I was ready for the business world. But first, I had a personal goal to achieve. Chapter 3. I could take a chance and not join the services, hoping I wouldn't be drafted. But I really wanted to learn to fly, and joining the services was my best shot. I also felt I had to serve my country, but I didn't want to die in some foreign place. I decided to join the Coast Guard. It wasn't my first choice, but it would probably keep me out of Vietnam. There was still a chance I could become a pilot, which was my main dream. I went to Portland to enlist. After my physical, I had a couple of weeks to say goodbye to Mom, Frank, Aunt Hilda, Marty, and my friends from Oregon State. It was the start of the rest of my life, and I hoped for something good to happen. 6 weeks later, I was thrilled. I had been accepted into flight school. We would start out on trainer planes, but I didn't care if they were old biplanes. I just wanted to fly. It turned out I got my wish, but it was harder than I thought. The engineering program almost overwhelmed me. I had no idea learning to be a pilot was so complex. Navigation, flight controls, aircraft systems, emergency procedures, and a lot more. What got me through was my determination to succeed. I wouldn't let anything stop me. I spent countless hours studying to make sure I made it. The flying part was the easiest for me. I wasn't afraid of the plane and seemed to have a natural feel for it. That was a big reason I succeeded in flight school. I was on top of the world. Even though the study was hard, I was flying. During my time at Pensacola Flight School, I made some friends. 2 of them became my best buddies. Tinker Tink Taylor was my closest friend, and Chip Billstrom was right behind. All 3 of us loved flying and worked hard to earn our wings. We helped each other, even if it was just to cheer up when things were tough. We drank beer together, chased girls, and became like brothers. Tink was a good old boy from northern Alabama. Smart as a whip, he often helped me with the bookwork, while I helped him with the flying part. Chip was a flatlander like me. He was from Fargo, North Dakota. He worked hard on the studies to become a good pilot, even though it didn't come naturally to him. We grew up quickly at Officer Candidate School, OCS. We were expected to act like leaders and gentlemen all the time. Well, almost all the time. We needed to relax now and then because the pressure was intense and we all felt it. Our first experience with an amphibious aircraft was with the Grumman Albatross. This aircraft could land on both water and runway. I thought it looked great and loved it from the moment I saw it in person. It had a clumsy look that only the crew who flew it could love. Attempts were made to replace it with helicopters, and this was still happening in 1965. It was slow, noisy, and vulnerable to salt water, but it was built like a tank, and those old Wright Cyclone engines could keep it flying longer than I could stay awake. As Tink would say, we were luckier than a dog with 2 tails to be flying these planes. It might get close to 200 knots on a good day and could cruise at about 130 knots, but we didn't mind, unless we were on an emergency run when every minute counted. When we graduated from flight school in Pensacola, Tink, Chip, and I had become very close. We had visited almost every bar in the area, looking for friendly company, and having our pilot wings got us plenty of attention. Our only problem was the Navy pilots. The jet jockeys had more prestige than we did. Still, we did quite well during our time there. I had thought about trying to find Penny, but I didn't know where to begin. I knew she wanted to be a writer, but that was all. I tried to think of someone who might know where she was. It had been over 4 years since I last saw her, so it was a long shot. I remembered Dorothy Perkins and eventually found her phone number after some trial and error. "Hi, Dorothy. I don't know if you remember me. It's Ron Francis," I said hesitantly. "Oh, sure. I remember you, Ron. How are you?" she asked brightly. "Fine, thanks." Dorothy, the reason I called, I'm looking for Penny Lane," I stammered. Oh, gee, I don't know where she is, Ron. She left town with some guy. Brian was his name, I think. I think she mentioned something about New York, but I'm not sure," she admitted. "New York? So, she was with some guy?" I wasn't sure I wanted to hear more. "Yeah, like I said, Brian somebody. I don't think they were very close, though, if you know what I mean." "No, you mean she wasn't, like, engaged or anything? I was hoping for the best." "Oh, no. She told me that he was just a boyfriend. You know, nothing serious." I felt a bit relieved and thanked Dorothy for her help. I asked her to tell Penny I was trying to reach her and that I was in the Coast Guard. She promised to pass on the message if she saw Penny. With that, the call ended. As I hung up the phone, I felt better, even though I was no closer to finding Penny. But there was hope, and I started thinking about my next move. How would I find Penny in a city of 8 million people? Tink, Chip, and I all graduated flight school and were given co-pilot duties at 3 different bases. Tink was sent to Mobile, Alabama, not far from Pensacola and close to his home. Chip went to Traverse City, Michigan, and lucky me, I got Kodiak, Alaska. I had to look it up on a map, and when I did, I wished I hadn't. Chip, always joking, said I was lucky to have all those Eskimo women to myself. Tink was a bit sad to be back home, but he was happy to keep flying. All of us were co-pilots, but with the shift to helicopters, we would become pilots soon enough. For now, we were all qualified to fly the HU-16E Albatross. Some people love Kodiak, Alaska, and call it home. They wouldn't want to live anywhere else. I met some of those people. I'm just not one of them. There's remote, and then there's life on Mars. Kodiak felt more like the latter. Fishing boats, abandoned whalers, native people, bad weather, and ocean. How they called the Pacific Ocean peaceful is a mystery to me. It is anything but peaceful. I can't count how many times we were called to search for a struggling ship or drifting crab boat in giant waves. I felt for the guys on the cutters. Whenever I thought we had it bad, I reminded myself of their job and kept quiet. What we learned quickly was to keep our gear and our plane in perfect shape. One mistake or a piece of equipment failing in that environment could be your last. I guess I became a bit obsessive about it for a while. Call it fear or just overreacting, but I was strict with our crew to make sure everything worked perfectly. Of course, we couldn't control the weather. Most of our missions were because of extreme weather. It was one thing to take off and start looking for someone with low clouds, strong crosswinds, and ice. It was another thing to head home, exhausted after hours of searching without results, and try to concentrate on getting back safely. As time moved on, that airstrip seemed smaller and farther away, I thought. After 15 months, I didn't care if they sent me to Vietnam. Anything was better than Kodiak, or so I thought. I remembered hearing an Edgar Allan Poe quote recently. It went something like, "Be careful what you wish for. You may get it." Well, we got it. After finishing my time in Alaska and almost getting myself killed twice, once during a rough water landing and once due to a bad weather decision, I was thrilled to be transferred to Miami. Compared to the North Pacific, it felt like paradise, or so I thought. Now don't get me wrong, I liked Florida, and man, there were plenty of good-looking women everywhere. But Florida had its downsides too, like hurricanes, sharks, mean guys, and other problems. I'm sure you get the picture. I had just been promoted to lieutenant, and I was feeling pretty good. I had my shiny new silver bars, a left seat, and an old MGA. I thought I was pretty hot stuff. One evening, I was sitting in a local bar with my buddies, eyeing a couple of attractive women sitting a few tables away. Chip and I, who had found ourselves in Miami together, were feeling pretty cool. When we were on a roll, we didn't have much trouble meeting ladies. While in Kodiak, I had given up searching for Penny. I didn't have much chance to look for her in Alaska. If I were honest, I had almost forgotten about her. Alaska was lonely, and since I didn't want to hit on someone else's girl, I had stayed single for over a year. I was ready for some fun, and those two women looked great to me. Chip and I got up and walked over to their table to introduce ourselves. "Hi, I'm Buck Rogers, and this is my sidekick, Steve Canyon," I started. The girls laughed right away, so I knew we were off to a good start. "Can we buy you girls a drink?" Chip asked with his best grin. "Sure, if it's okay with my husband," the blonde answered. I looked at Chip, and he looked at me. We had the same thought. "Uh-oh, too late!" From behind the pool room, two huge guys walked up. They looked about 7 feet tall and weighed 500 pounds each with tattoos of alligators on their eyelids. We were in big trouble. "What are you two jerks doing?" the one in front asked. "Sorry, man. We didn't know the ladies were with someone. Our mistake," Chip quickly said. "Mistake is right," his friend added, and next thing I knew, I was on the floor with severe jaw pain and seeing stars. I'm a pilot, not a fighter. These guys would kill us if we fought back, so I just picked myself up and headed for the door. I had no idea where Chip was. Then the big guy hit me again, this time on the ear. Down I went, with sharp pain in the ear and ringing in my head. This was really bad. When I tried to stand again, I saw Chip propped up against the wall. The other guy was punching him in the stomach and ribs. Chip tried to protect himself with his arms, but we were no match for these brutes. I thought we might end up in the hospital or worse when we were saved. The MPs showed up just in time. I guess the bartender called them, and they made the fight stop. "These two jerks were trying to hit on our wives," one of the big guys yelled. "You military guys think you can take whatever you want. Next time I see you, there won't be any MPs around, and you'll be sorry," he spat. I believed him. This was a place we should avoid from now on. We staggered out of the bar with help from the MPs. Chip was in bad shape. I thought he might have broken a rib or two, and I was right. He could hardly breathe. The MPs offered to take us back to the base so he could get medical help. I was probably going to have a sore jaw, maybe a couple of loose teeth and a painful ear, but otherwise I'd live. Don't you guys ever learn? Stay away from local trouble. Go uptown if you want to meet girls. Those two women thought that little scene was very funny. Bet you did too, huh? The tough petty officer sneered. We deserve the dressing down, I thought. Ignorance can be very painful. It was especially so for Chip. We recovered from our injuries, although Chip was grounded for 3 weeks while he healed. It took the fun out of things for us. As Chip rightly pointed out, we were pilots, not fighters, and we were outmatched. I was expecting some trouble after the bar incident, but it didn't come. We got a lecture about using better judgment from the commanding officer, but that was it. I guess they thought we'd learned our lesson. If it happened again, we wouldn't be so lucky. When I ran into the MP a couple of weeks later, I thanked him for his help and for not making a big deal of it with our boss. He smiled, said he figured we'd learn not to let it happen again, shook my hand, and that was that. Hurricane season was coming, and it was a stinking hot August. The air was so thick it hurt to breathe. Chilling out and surviving the storm flying was a great way to cool down for a bit, but it was dull on the ground in our duty shack, just waiting for something to happen. Chip had a way of zoning out that worked for him. He said he put his mind in neutral and ignored the heat and humidity, putting himself in a half-asleep state. We joked about it, but really we were jealous. The rest of us were miserable. We tried everything to stay cool, but the air conditioner in the ready room couldn't handle the heat. Then things got even worse. Hurricane Beulah was moving up the eastern Caribbean and heading straight for us. I thought I'd seen bad weather before, but at 25,000 feet, looking at that storm's swirling pattern, I knew we were in for trouble. About 3 hours before the storm was expected to hit the Keys, we were grounded. All we could do was watch. Anyone out in that storm wouldn't get help for a while if they got into trouble. I never feared the weather in Kodiak. It was rough and cold, but I knew only my mistakes or a mechanical problem would be dangerous there. This was my first hurricane, and it scared me. It was chaotic and out of my control. It tore roofs off buildings like they were paper. Palm trees bent over at 90 degrees. Debris flew everywhere, and anyone out there was unlucky if they got hit. During my time in Miami, I never got used to hurricanes. I had a few close calls when we were searching for a damaged ship or lost boater, sometimes staying out too long and struggling to get back to our base. As I said earlier, I loved the GOAT, as we called our plane. It was solid and reliable, like an old car, and it saved us many times. More importantly, we helped in a lot of rescues, thanks to a tight crew and sometimes a bit of luck. I had a knack for flying these old Grummins. I had flown at least 6 different ones, and each had its personality. But I felt they all knew I cared about them, and they behaved well for me. Helicopters were starting to replace them, and I thought my time in the Coast Guard might end when these old planes were retired. My next assignment was in New York City, more precisely Brooklyn. Not where you'd expect a Coast Guard station, but it was active and lively. It was here that my life took a new turn, and my future became clearer. Tink had been posted to San Diego, Chip to New London, and I got the Big Apple. I was still flying my beloved Albatross, and I was happy. I was out of the hurricane zone and into the busy commercial shipping lanes. The North Atlantic could be stormy too, and with all the traffic between Boston and Baltimore, we kept busy. Chip and I stayed in touch and saw each other sometimes. In San Diego, Tink was thrilled. His only complaint was having to return to flight school to qualify on the Fairchild C-123 Provider, a fixed-wing, ground-based search and rescue aircraft. We felt bad for him, but knew our time would come soon. Brooklyn was about to become a training base for helicopters. It looked like I might have to give up my GOAT, and that made me sad. Call me old-fashioned, but that's how I felt. Throughout my Coast Guard career, I stayed in touch with Mom and Frank. We talked at least twice a month and called on special occasions like birthdays. I had a couple of leaves in Kodiak, and I caught a ride to Seattle to visit them in Bellingham. Frank always tried to convince me how great Alaska was, but I wasn't interested. We shared our stories and probably bored Mom, but we grew closer, and he stopped being just my stepfather after a while. Mom looked just as great as when I had found her 4 years earlier. Maybe it was my imagination, but she hadn't aged at all, thanks to Frank. She got involved in a couple of local charities and spent time with friends, keeping her busy and happy. Seeing her happy made me feel good too. After all the pain Dad had caused her, she deserved her new life. Unexpected things can happen when you least expect them. 6 months after I was posted to Brooklyn, I was waiting for my annual eye checkup at the base optometrist's office, thumbing through a magazine. I wasn't paying much attention until I saw a story about New York tourism and efforts to clean up the city's image. I glanced at the writer's name and blinked. It was Penny Lane. I was pretty sure there weren't many women writers named Penny Lane. So I wrote down the article, the magazine publisher, and their phone number. In a few seconds, my plans changed. The search was back on. When I left the optometrist's office, I went back to my room and called the publisher's number. They shut me down quickly. No, they didn't know a Penny Lane. She didn't work for the magazine. She was probably a freelance writer, and they didn't give out personal information even if they had it. Blah, 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 etc., etc., etc. I hung up the phone, feeling really upset. So close, yet so far away, as the saying goes. I was sure it had to be my Penny. Who else could it be? I decided to start my search for Penny again. Even if she wasn't interested in me, or if she was married with kids, at least I could move on. I needed a plan. First, I thought about where to look. Do writers belong to any groups? How do they get their work published? Is Penny writing somewhere regularly? Who would know these answers? My first idea was to look in newspapers. Many writers start with newspapers. It was a place to start, even though there were so many newspapers. There were daily papers, local free ones, weekly ones, and underground ones. The list was endless. When I first came to Governor's Island, I had called every P. Lane in the New York phone book. That was a waste of time. I began with the big daily newspapers. After a while, I figured out the best person to ask would be the features editor. Each paper had one, though sometimes with different titles. It was a slow and hard process. I had a few promising talks along the way. One editor remembered Penny talking about an article she wrote, but they never used it, and he didn't have her phone number. I couldn't know if it was my Penny. Another editor thought she talked to Penny but couldn't remember when or what it was about. She seemed very disorganized. It took almost a month of off and on trying to get a real lead. But when it came, I was excited. I was talking to an editor who worked for a publisher of local newsletters. These had little stories about businesses or interesting people, and they were given out free in certain neighborhoods. His name was Warren Quincy, and I'll never forget him. He practically delivered me to Penny. He started asking questions, and I decided to tell him everything. Boy, did I tell him. He invited me to his office to hear more. I didn't know if he was sure if the Penny he knew was my Penny, but he got hooked on my story. Soon I was telling him all about my last 10 years. Warren was a strange guy, but a great listener. He put all the pieces together and finally told me what I wanted to know. "Well, Ron, I think I know where you can find your girl," he said. He pulled a business card out of his vest pocket and handed it to me. I looked at it and my jaw dropped. It was a simple white card with dark green letters that read, "Penny Lane Journalist, Chelsea, 64833. You had this all along," I said, a little angry. "Well, I thought I might have it." "I found it yesterday," he said nervously. I thought about it and decided he wasn't playing games. I shook his hand hard. "Thanks. This is great. I won't forget this." I must have looked silly because he almost laughed. "Promise me something, Ron. If she's your Penny, I want to know how it all turns out." "It's a great story," he grinned. "You got it. If she's my Penny, I'll owe you, and I always pay my debts." "Good luck. I hope she's the one." I almost stopped at a phone booth on the street to try the number, but something told me to find a quiet place first. Why was I calling her after all these years? How did I feel about her? What did I want to know about her life? These answers were clear to me, but I was unsure about her reaction. What if it wasn't my Penny? I decided to head back to the base and call from my room. I looked at my watch. It was almost 3 in the afternoon. If I called around 5, I might catch her. Maybe she worked from home. I walked, took a bus, and then a cab, finally reaching the base gate. At 10 to 5, I couldn't wait any longer. I picked up the phone and dialed her number. The phone rang 3 times before someone answered. "Hello?" It was her voice. I'd know it anywhere. It was my Penny. "Penny, it's me, Ron," I said, trying to stay calm. Ron? There was a pause. Oh my God, Ron, is it really you? Ron Francis? She sounded as excited as I was. It seemed like she was happy to hear from me. Yes, it's me, from Aberdeen. Oh, Ron, it's been so long. How are you? Where are you? Right now, at my room in the bachelor officer's quarters at the Governor's Island Coast Guard Station, I said. Here? In New York? You're in the Coast Guard? She sounded totally shocked. Can you come here? I mean, can we meet? She asked. I was hoping you'd want to. I have the most amazing story to tell you, I said, feeling hopeful. Oh, I'd love to. When? Tonight? Tomorrow? She was eager to see me. Whenever you want. I've got a few days off, and since you left me that phone message from the motel in Eugene, I've been trying to find you, I said, bending the truth a little. You have? She seemed surprised. On and off, to be honest. I've been hard to reach sometimes, but I can tell you everything when we meet, I said. Where are you? I'm in New York. I have a small apartment in Soho. Why don't you come here? I can't wait to see you. That was all the encouragement I needed. It'll take me about an hour to get uptown to your place. How about we have dinner together? We have a lot to talk about, I suggested. That sounds perfect. As long as I make dinner. I don't want to share you with anyone tonight. She seemed pretty sure of what she wanted. This was a different Penny from our high school days. Deal. What's your address? After writing it down and ending the call, I could hardly contain my excitement. I had found her, and she wanted to see me. What more could I hope for? It took an hour to get to her place, and I felt nervous as I went up the stairs to the second floor and looked for her door number. I stood in front of it for a minute, trying to calm down before I knocked. She must have been nearby because the door opened almost immediately, and there she was. We stood still for a moment, taking in the changes in each other, and then everything happened at once. Penny jumped into my arms, nearly squeezing the life out of me, tears in her eyes. I have to admit, my eyes were a bit wet too. When she let go, I stepped back and looked at her, stunned. She was stunning. Before, she was pretty. Now she was absolutely beautiful. I just shook my head. I didn't need to say anything. She could see it in my eyes. Ron, it's so good to see you. You look so handsome in your uniform and seem taller than I remember, she said with wonder. I can't believe how gorgeous you are, Penny. We've both changed a lot in the last 7 years, I said, smiling. Has it really been that long? I can't believe it. You have to tell me everything. You said it was an amazing story, and I'm a writer, so I want to hear all about it, she laughed. Well, I did kind of promise my life story to the guy who helped me find you. Warren Quincy. As a thank you, I joked. Oh well, as long as he brought us back together, I can't complain, she said, looking truly happy. It made me feel great. But I'll still tell you all about it, I promised. First, what did you want to talk about when you called from Eugene? I had to ask. It had been on my mind for years. Oh, I wanted to let you know I had broken up with my boyfriend, she said carefully. I wanted you to know that I still cared about you. I stood still. Instinctively, I took a step toward her, wrapped my arms around her, and kissed her. I kissed her deeply. Any doubts I had about us vanished in that moment. She returned the kiss and wrapped her arms around my neck. It was a kiss neither of us would forget. We had been waiting for this moment for so long, not sure if it would ever come. We stood in the doorway of her apartment, lost in a kiss, not caring if anyone saw us. Finally, we pulled back, and I closed the door before pulling her close again and kissing her more gently. Have we waited this long and not known how we felt about each other? I asked. Yes, we have. The look in her eyes told me everything. We had lost each other before, and now we had found each other again. Neither of us wanted to be apart anymore. It was the beginning of the happiest time in my life, and I knew it right then. I'm not sure how long it took us to get to the bedroom, but it didn't matter. We didn't need to talk about it. Neither of us were new to this, but this first time with the girl, the woman I had waited so long for, it was going to be special. And it was. We spent time together slowly, and it was very emotional for both of us. It felt like I was set free, finding my love still waiting for me after 7 years. I wasn't just excited. I was relieved she still felt the same way about me. It felt like nothing changed except that we were older, more mature, and Penny was even more beautiful. I wanted this time with her to last forever. Ron, can you stay? Tonight, I mean? Yes. I still have almost a week of leave. I can't believe my luck. Finding you. We have time to be together, Penny. I promised. Yes, we don't need to rush. We can get to know each other again, she smiled. I can't think of anything I'd rather do, I whispered. She nuzzled into my shoulder and neck, and we just lay there for a while. Whatever she had planned for dinner was left forgotten. If I was hungry, it was for Penny. The food could wait. It must be exciting working on those big white boats, she said later. Well, maybe, but that's not what I do, I smiled. Oh, what do you do? I fly airplanes, I said proudly. What, you're a pilot, she exclaimed. Yup. I fly an airplane called an albatross. It's a kind of flying boat. It can land on both water and land. Wow, Ron Francis from Aberdeen, Iowa is a pilot. That's amazing. She sounded so surprised. How did that happen? How did you become a pilot and join the Coast Guard? It took some time to tell the story, but over the next hour I shared how I found my love for flying thanks to Mom and Frank. I talked about how lucky I was to get into the Coast Guard. I left out the dangerous parts and my occasional blunders, making it sound as exciting as I could, wanting to impress my Penny. I didn't mention Liz at all. We were lying on her bed while I talked, and she seemed really interested. I was also eager to hear her story. Dad got a new job in Dubuque, so he and Mom moved there just after I started college. I stayed with a friend, Bobby Jenkins. You remember her, right? We were in most of the same classes, and I was lucky to have a place to stay. When I graduated, I wanted to work for a newspaper, but there were no jobs in Aberdeen or Dubuque. I sent out dozens of resumes, but nothing came of it. In the end, I got a job at State Farm Insurance in the advertising department. I wrote a few magazine pieces, small stuff like that. At least I was getting paid to write. How did you end up in New York? I was curious. It was a long way from Aberdeen. Brian, the guy I was seeing at the time, suggested it. He said I'd have a better chance of finding work here. He was moving to New York for a job, too, and he used that to convince me to come with him. I thought about it for a while. I didn't really want to be with him. He was nice, but he wasn't you, she said, looking at me closely. Anyway, I took a chance and went with him to see if I could get a break. It was probably a mistake, but I was eager, so I did it. What happened with Brian? I asked. He thought I loved him. I didn't. When I told him, he got really mad. He said I led him on and made him look foolish. It was a rough time. I grabbed my things and left. I had some money, so I rented this place, and I've been here ever since. She told the story without any regret. You've been here for 3 years? Yes, 3 very tough years. There were times when I didn't have a dime or anything to eat. I just had to push through to prove I could do it. I couldn't let my parents know I was struggling so much. They never supported my dream to be a writer. They thought I'd end up a starving artist. I almost did, she laughed. Are you still struggling? Not so much anymore, she said, sounding proud. I have a couple of regular columns and I've sold a few features, which has helped a lot. I also work part-time writing ads for a small agency. Altogether, I'm doing a lot better, she smiled. Wow, that sounds really tough. I'm amazed you stuck with it. Many people would have given up, I said. Ron, you know this is what I wanted to do. I had to try. I had to see if I could make it. I still think I can. I just need a break, and I can make a career out of this, she said seriously. Good for you, Penny. I'm proud of you. I'm so glad I found you. It's all I've thought about these past years. I wanted to fly, and I got that chance. And I wanted to find you, and now, here we are. I can't ask for more. I feel the same, Ron. I think we were meant to be together. I had nearly given up hope of ever seeing you again, and then your call this afternoon. And now us, here together. Yes, I do. To be honest, sometimes I lost hope that I'd find you, but the way things have turned out, yes, we are supposed to be together. Someone or something is making this happen. And I don't want to fight it or ignore it, do you? No, this is what I've wanted for so long. Now, after tonight, I know I'm sure I love you, Ron. Penny, I love you too. You've been the only thing on my mind for all these years. I can't believe you feel the same. I am so lucky, I whispered. So, what happens now? She asked quietly. I don't know, I said seriously. I need to figure out how we can get married and where we can live and all that stuff." "Getting married? Are you serious?" She sat up quickly, her hand on my shoulder. "Yeah, well, isn't that what people do when they're in love?" I asked carefully. She broke into a big smile and leaned down and kissed me. "Yes, that's exactly what they do. I felt like I was missing a step and then it hit me. Penny, I love you with all my heart. I've loved you for a long time. Will you marry me?" She smiled, and I could see tears forming in her lovely blue eyes. Yes, I will marry you, Ron Francis," she said joyfully. "I'm sorry I don't have a ring yet, but since we've only been back together for a few hours, I hope I can be forgiven?" I asked. "Of course you can, but only for a little while. In the meantime, why don't we make it official?" She smiled. "And how would you suggest we do that?" I teased. "Like this, my love." She slid her hand to my manhood and began a sensual massage that quickly aroused me. It was clear what should happen next. As I entered her, I felt that this might be the best day of my life so far. What could be better than finding your true love and then making love to her? Nothing, I thought. But then again, that's what I felt the day I got my wings. When I woke up the next morning, I was aware of the woman in bed next to me. Her scent, soft skin, and messy hair were appealing. I was already excited, and my hand reached for her breast as I pulled close to her, holding her tightly. The past few hours had been my personal paradise. I had everything I needed for the rest of my life. What more could I want? The answer would come soon. The next week went by quickly. We searched the city for the right ring and finally found it. Penny was careful with money, and I was thankful for it. I had saved up some of my pay, but getting married was a big step, and I wanted to make sure we could manage financially. As we discussed these issues, I was glad Penny always found practical solutions. It was a big relief knowing she was so sensible and clear-minded. It was just another reason why I loved her. Eventually, my leave ended, and I had to go back to the base. She knew I wouldn't be far away and that I could see her often, but not being able to be with her, sleep with her, and hold her in the mornings was my personal torment. We had grown so close. It felt like I was leaving her for another world. In fact, it was a sign of things to come. When I got back on duty, I was called, along with 2 other pilots, to the commanding officer's office that first morning. We got a quick dose of reality. We were being reassigned to Da Nang Air Base in South Vietnam. My stomach churned when I heard those words. It felt like a death sentence. The last place I wanted to be was Vietnam. Penny took the news very hard. She cried, and I cried, and we held each other every minute we were together. It was the first time in my life that I seriously thought about death. I was going to war. I was going to fly a slow plane with no weapons in a dangerous place. I had to admit I was scared. I had heard all the horror stories from other servicemen, and they didn't give me any comfort. Da Nang was very busy. The Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard, private planes, and who knows what else were all using the base. Air traffic control was always busy. I was lucky to have experience with busy areas like New York, so it wasn't as hard for me as it could have been. One thing was clear: you had to focus every minute you were in the air. Our mission was combat, rescue, and recovery. We flew over the South China Sea looking for downed pilots. Miami was tough, but Da Nang was much tougher. The worst part that stayed with me throughout my tour was the poor morale. None of us wanted to be there, but we had to deal with it and do our jobs. A few guys found ways to profit from their time, but for the rest of us, it was like living in our own personal hell. The only good moments were when we managed to save some pilots before the sharks got to them. They died from the elements or drowned. It didn't happen often enough to make me feel good, but those we saved were extremely grateful. It didn't take long to realize this was an unwinnable war. Despite our power and strategy, we couldn't beat a guerrilla army that didn't count its losses. I wrote to Penny every other day unless I was on a mission. I didn't let up on our letters this time. Very early on, I made a big decision. If I was going to marry my Penny, I didn't want any secrets between us. I took a chance, and about a month after I arrived in Vietnam, I told Penny about Liz. I didn't downplay Liz's importance. I explained what happened and how it ended when she went back to Canada. Liz's phone call had reminded me of how important honesty was. I had been infatuated with Liz, but I was in love with Penny. Her letters came in bunches. I would carefully check the postmarks to read them in order. About 3 weeks after I told Penny about Liz, I noticed there were a few days without letters. That was unusual. The first letter after the gap told the story. She was very upset with my revelation about Liz. She thought it was different from her dating Brian. She felt that I had loved Liz, and only her leaving had stopped me from choosing Liz over her. I had to think deeply about my feelings after reading that. I had taken a risk in telling Penny about Liz, and now it seemed like it had backfired. My honesty appeared to be misunderstood. I didn't know what to say or do to fix it and bring our relationship back on track. I worried about it for a day and then sat down to write her a letter to try and make things right again. My dearest Penny, when I read your letter after I told you about Liz, I was very upset. I felt really bad because what I said about her made you upset. I thought hard about it, and I need you to know that I am sure I love you. Yes, Liz was important to me back in college. We were together and I liked her a lot. But when she left, I didn't even think about going with her. I was young and easily influenced, but I got over it. I've never gotten over you. When I knew you called, I was thrilled because you mean a lot to me, even though we hadn't seen each other for 3 years. If I had known you wanted to tell me you were single, I would have been the happiest guy in Oregon. I never stopped hoping we would find each other again. Sometimes I wondered if I'd ever see you again, but I never gave up hope. It's really sad that we met and then got separated so quickly. I live for the day I can come back to you. I'm sorry if I hurt you, but I had to tell you the whole truth about me. I hope you understand. I love you and I can't stand the idea of not being with you. I hope you wear that ring every day to remind you of my love. All my love. Ron, 2 weeks later, I got a letter from Penny that made me breathe easy again. She understood, and she felt I had done something important by telling her the truth. She said she knew I took a risk by telling her about Liz when I could have kept quiet. The more she thought about it, the more she was proud of me for being honest. She said she had never thought about breaking our engagement. She was mine forever, she said. That night, I slept much better. Every waking moment, I thought about surviving this tour and getting home to Penny. Home was now New York City. I sent my pay to Penny, and she took care of it like it was her main job. We wrote letters all the time. You'd think we'd run out of topics, but Penny would tell me about the latest moves she made with our money, how it was growing, the price of housing, and how we'd qualify for a mortgage. That's the good thing about being a writer. I tried not to tell her how horrible the war was. Penny took charge while I was in Vietnam, and I couldn't have been happier. It helped me focus on my duty and stay safe. I wasn't ready for a war, and I didn't know much other than following orders, doing my best and trying to stay out of trouble. Our airplane, the Goat, was in danger if we got too close to the enemy. This made us very focused. The weather was bad too. Our base was on the coast, and bad weather made rescue operations almost impossible. Like Miami, the humidity and salt water were rough on our plane. Our days as a rescue unit were counting down. We were limited in how we could use the full ability of our aircraft, and it was frustrating to see it get worse. I spent 15 tough months at Da Nang, and when I left, I didn't feel proud, just relieved. I made it through in one piece. The whole posting felt pointless. We saved a few pilots and lives, but I wondered if we could have done more with a bigger effort. When I got home, I was lucky not to face any protesters. Most people didn't know the Coast Guard was part of the Vietnam War, both on water and in the air, for rescue and combat. When I got back to New York, I was happy to see not just Penny, but also my mom and Frank. It felt great to be back in the U.S. Penny had organized it all, and her parents were coming the next day. I hadn't seen them in 8 years, and wondered what they'd think of me. I wasn't worried, but still tried to be on my best behavior. I shouldn't have worried. Mr. and Mrs. Lane treated me like their son right away. They were proud to have me in the family and of my service. They got along great with my mom and Frank, which was a big relief. I was worried there might be issues because of my mom's past, but Penny had explained everything to them after I went to college. It wasn't a problem. The only tough part was not having private time with Penny. I had gone 15 months without holding her. With both sets of parents around, we couldn't find a way to be alone until they all went home. I was curious about how Penny's parents could afford the trip, and she told me she had invested my pay in 2 good stocks, Polaroid and Texas Instruments. They did very well, and the dividends paid for her parents' flights. I was very proud of her. She was special. After our parents left almost a week later, they made us promise to set our wedding date soon. We finally had time to ourselves. That first night together was as wonderful as I had imagined during all those lonely nights in Da Nang. We held each other close and talked into the night, enjoying being together again. I remember waking a couple of times and reaching for Penny just to make sure she was really there. I would hug her close and kiss her shoulder. I loved how she tasted and smelled. It felt like being home again. I had 6 months left in my service. I knew I wouldn't sign up again. I loved the Coast Guard and flying my plane, but it was almost over, and I needed to find a job as a civilian. I had a job offer already, from Frank, flying for North Island Airways. I wanted the job badly, but there was a problem. Penny had her career in New York. I didn't want to make her give up all she had worked for. I had waited so long to be with her, and I didn't want to lose her now. Frank offered me the job right after I told him I was almost done with the Coast Guard. He needed another pilot with my skills, and he was willing to wait for me. Normally, I would have taken the job right away, but I told Frank I had to think about Penny's career and talk to her first. He smiled and said he had waited a long time for my mom, so he could wait a bit longer for me. I was nervous to talk to Penny about Frank's offer. It meant leaving New York and her starting over, but I really wanted the job. I loved the Pacific Northwest and hoped Penny would too, but I couldn't forget how hard she had worked. It took me a long time to gather the courage to discuss it with her. "Penny, I need to tell you something important," I began. She smiled. "Yes. I'm not re-enlisting in the Coast Guard when my time is up," I said slowly. "I know. You've already told me that," she said, still smiling. "I wanted you to know I got a job offer," I said nervously. "Really? Tell me about it." "Frank offered me a job at North Island," I replied, stammering. "Really? And what would you do?" "Flying. I'm a pilot, and he needs another pilot." "Yes, you are a pilot," she teased. "The thing is, it's in Washington up in the Northwest," I continued, still stammering. "I know where it is," she said, almost laughing. "What's so funny?" I asked. "You are. You're afraid I won't want to go to Bellingham, aren't you?" she said. "Well, your career is just starting here in New York. I can't take you away from that," I said softly. "Oh, Ron, you were thinking of me and willing to sacrifice for me." "Yes, I was. I waited so long for us to be together, I wasn't going to let my dreams break us apart." She sat in my lap and hugged me. "My dear Ron, my typewriter is portable, and so am I. I will go anywhere with you. I love you, and I won't let you give up something important to you. Writers can write anywhere. Frank's neighbor, Ernie Gann, told me that," she said, then kissed me. "Frank told me about the offer. If it makes you happy, then I'll be happy." "Really? I don't know what to say. Are you sure?" "Yes, I'm very sure. I love you and want to be with you. Besides, your mom told me how beautiful it is there. She said it's a great place to raise kids." "She did? How many kids?" "Oh, I don't know. Maybe 2, maybe 10, she laughed. "How about 2 to start with, and we can decide from there?" "Okay, whatever you say," she grinned. "You're enjoying this, aren't you? You knew I wanted to keep flying. You knew about Frank's offer, and you didn't say a word. You're sneaky," I said, tickling her sides playfully. She wiggled and laughed, trying to make me stop. Okay, I confess," she shouted, still laughing. "I love you, Ron. I always have, and I always will. I'll go with you anywhere. I will have your kids. I will be there for you every day," she said, suddenly serious. "Oh, God, Penny, I am so lucky. I have everything I ever wanted. I am so lucky," I said, hugging her tightly. The wedding was in Bellingham. Aunt Hilda, Frank, my mom, and Penny's parents were all there thanks to Penny's smart investing. Tink and Chip were there too. Tink was my best man, and Chip and Frank were ushers. Our service time was almost up, and only Chip decided to stay in. Penny and I would return to New York for my last 3 months, then move to Bellingham for good. The days before the wedding went by fast. We wanted to find a place to live, even though Frank and Mom offered us to stay with them. We wanted our own space, but we appreciated their offer. We planned to buy a home and move in when we came back from New York. Frank was now the main owner of North Island and had bought a Grumman Goose plane from a Canadian company. It was in great shape, and I would get trained on it quickly. It felt familiar, like a smaller version of my old plane, but still different. This Goose had floats that could go in and out and big windows to see the view for the 9 passengers we'd carry. I wasn't in the Coast Guard anymore. Now, my flying would focus on keeping passengers safe and making things run smoothly. Frank had taught me a lot about how flying for the military was different from flying for a company. I had a lot to learn, but it was still all about flying. The good thing was, I wouldn't be flying the same route all the time. My job was to take rich folks up to faraway fishing camps on the central and northern BC coast. I found out that in summer I'd be very busy. We would need another pilot so I wouldn't go over my flying hour limits. I told Frank about Tink being free to help. Frank was very picky about safety. I wasn't surprised or upset. I knew how risky it was to fly too many hours without a break. A few times, after long search and rescue missions, I got so tired I made mistakes, and my co-pilot had to fix them. I quickly learned to let the co-pilot fly some, especially on long trips. Penny and I found a house a few miles northeast of the airport. It was in a small farming area called Linden, and it was only a 20-minute drive to the airport. The 3-bedroom ranch house was big enough for us, but Penny had a surprise when we moved in. She was going to have a baby. I was so happy. Not only that, Penny got a job with the Bellingham Herald, our local newspaper. They were glad to have an experienced writer, and Penny was happy she could work from home, and I could drop her work off at the paper on my way to work. When I thought about everything, I couldn't believe what had happened in the last 9 years. I found out about my mom's secret affair, saw her thrown out of her home because of my dad's plan, and left my hometown of Aberdeen, never to go back. It took 3 years to see my mom again, but when I did, my life got better. She had married a great guy, was happy in her new life, and looked younger than before. Her husband, Frank Trimble, was a pilot and had never been married until he met my mom. He knew he had found something special. He got me into flying, and I fell in love with it. Everything seemed to lead me to one path. I joined the Coast Guard and learned to fly, spending almost 4 years flying an Albatross. Then, just when I thought life couldn't get better, I found Penny. Even better, we both realized we had loved each other for years. It only took a couple of hours to know it was true. And now, here I am. I live in the Pacific Northwest, a place I love. I'm married to my childhood sweetheart, and we have a baby on the way. I'm still flying thanks to Frank, and that's all I ever want to do for a job. What more could I ask for? Nothing. Hey, audience, if you like this video and want to keep up with more thrilling stories, make sure to subscribe to Prince Cheating Tales and hit the notification bell. You don't want to miss out on our upcoming adventures. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next wonderful story.